Witness a gamer's descent into madness. A mind unhinged by vengeance. Weaponized cloning experiments. Feline wave attacks. Abusive gameplay patterns endlessly repeated. Unstoppable army controlled by an unseen mastermind. This is the battle for Crèche Y'llek. This is the Grimishka War. Our story begins with these two bullies. First, they shoved me with their mage hand, and when I got angry, they dared me to open this chest they were playing with. I suspected it was just another prank, but I was also curious. Strange screams and noises were coming from the chest, and I simply had to know what was inside. I hadn't opened the lid by an inch when sharp claws lashed out at me from the inside. A horrific little creature, like a furless cat with sharp fangs and claws. A Grimishka. I readied my weapons and spells, but then I stopped myself. Not this creature should be the object of my wrath. No, this was about to get messy. Since these Giths seem to love pranks and traps, I decided to set up a few of my own. A frost arrow, a quick sprint to close the door, and another frost arrow. Why am I so clumsy? Guys, I'm really trying to hit the Grimishka, I promise. Why would I cast darkness there? Yeah, I agree, that looks like a complete waste. I also rearranged some of these incendiary barrels. I thought that couldn't hurt. During its own turn, the Grimishka duplicated itself. How curious, but probably nothing to worry about. For reasons only known to herself, my cleric decided to throw a healing potion at the Grimishkas. What a nonsensical thing to do, considering she wore her healing equipment and thus ended up applying all sorts of defensive buffs to the little critters. During their turns, 2 out of 3 Githyanki made it out of the bedroom that I had accidentally blocked with darkness. Thank God my little blunder didn't confuse them too much. The Gith in the main room sadly slipped and fell on the ice surfaces. All I can say is I'm sorry. The 2 dudes that had reached the Grimishka looked a bit dehydrated, so I thought I'd throw some water at them. Gith are kinda amphibic after all, so I thought they'd appreciate it. My sorcerer then narrowly missed the Grimishka with her ray of frost. Even worse, she got so close to the Grimishkas that she set off their magic allergy. What is magic allergy? Well, let me explain. When spells are cast close to a Grimishka, it becomes unstable. At the beginning of its next turn, it triggers a random effect, and they can be really destructive. One of them you already saw when it duplicated. So it's absolutely imperative to not use spells near Grimishkas. You really should avoid it at all costs. Fortunately, no further duplications occurred the next turn, and the Grimishkas only dealt some minor damage to the Githyanki warriors. Another ice arrow accidentally blew up the explosive barrels. I'm not sure why I did that. My cleric began making a habit of throwing healing potions, a good strategy to help the Gith warriors, but because of her terrible aim she kept hitting the Grimishkas instead. The Githyanki were determined to get rid of the little pests and now began to fight them with full force. The 2 warriors both hit them with savage strikes, but hadn't considered that this turn the Grimishkas had gained armor of Agathis from their magic allergy. Because they were still wet from my water bottle, the frost damage hit them like a truck and killed one of them. Again, very sorry. But despite these setbacks, the Gith would certainly overwhelm the puny cats sooner or later. The main thing that delayed their victory was really just the constant spam of healing potions hitting the Grimishkas, especially now that the other party members were joining in on the silly fun my cleric had invented. Someone also decided to shoot an arrow of darkness in the general direction of the fight, making things even more confusing. It didn't take too long for another duplication to occur. By this point, it would have really helped if that one guy left in the bedroom wouldn't always skip his turn only because the exit was blocked by darkness. The fight was trailing along somewhat monotonously when suddenly one of the Grimishkas turned into a full-grown panther. That somehow seemed a lot more serious, so I decided to get some help. I opened the door with my mage hand. Surely the reinforcements would make quick work of the situation. I also tried to get the doctor to join the fight from her office, but for now she didn't seem interested. Understandable, her research is probably more important, but now we already had another duplication. Finally, after a little while, some reinforcements arrived, just in time to witness yet another duplication. My favorite pastime of potion throwing turned out to be an expensive hobby, and I was quickly running out of health pots. I decided to send my quickest runner to buy new ones from the vendor on the other side of the crèche. He's kinda quiet though, so he didn't tell anyone about what was happening in the infirmary. The reinforcements did a great job keeping the Grimishkas at bay, but the narrow entrance made things difficult. Somehow, someone or something was always in the way, closing the door and blocking the doorway. Inside the infirmary, things were heating up more and more. My cleric began to get into trouble with the Grimishkas, but was able to delegate the problem to Dr. Gustil by casting Sanctuary on herself. My sorceress would soon come under pressure too, but fortunately she's a Dwergar, so she can just be invisible indefinitely. What's more, casting Minor Illusion doesn't break invisibility, so she can just keep casting illusory cats for the real cats to play and have fun with. How nice. Always good to know a thing or two about races in this game. Hey, did you know I just released an in-depth guide on races in Baldur's Gate 3? Go watch it. That one dude finally made it out of the bedroom. Despite their heavy losses, the Githyanki had a considerable amount of firepower on their side now. But the Grimishka also kept duplicating. An even fight, a tug of war over many turns, with me as, let's say, a bystander. After having a strong first turn, Gustil began acting all weird, basically skipping her turn a few times in a row. The Githyanki were beginning to lose the fight for the infirmary. Things became too dangerous for my drow cleric, who somehow lost her sanctuary after resuming her favorite activity. She had to down my only invisibility potion to survive. Not much later, Gustil died unceremoniously off-screen. It became clear that the Githyanki wouldn't be able to hold the infirmary, and from there on, the fight would likely spill over into the main hall and further into the crèche, with much more powerful and numerous defenders than in the infirmary. That's when I realized something crucial. For what I was about to do, none of my party members except for my Dwergar were useful anymore. They had to get out of the crèche, all of them, and as quickly as possible, before the Grimishkas ran into too many more Githyanki. They barely managed to leave through the side entrance without the situation escalating completely. It was around this time that I received the first signals that the game wasn't exactly built for what I was doing, and much less so for what I was about to do. A strange possession overcame the cats for a moment, as they were stuck somewhere in between instances of combat. And it ended as quickly as it began. The fight somehow spilled over to the main entrance corridor. I sadly lost the footage, but you didn't miss much. The 3 Gith defending the entrance were no match for what was by now a sizable force of battle cats. Then, for the first time since it all began, I was finally out of combat. So I did what any reasonable person would do and set up a cloning facility. From here on, 90% of what I'm doing is casting minor illusion. There are 3 important things about minor illusion. First, I can cast it from invisibility. Second, it triggers the Grimishka's magic allergy, and can thus trigger their special effects, including the duplication or the panther polymorph. Third, it allows me to herd the Grimishkas around. It's very tedious and unreliable, but with most casts I can at least nudge a few Grimishkas into the direction where I cast the illusion. The Grimishka's reproduction mechanics are very unique. As you saw, they reproduce asexually, through fission. In nature, this is most well known with single cells, but some multicellular organisms can reproduce this way too, for example some starfish. But a Grimishka can also turn into a panther, metamorphosis. The panther no longer has the magic allergy trait, so it can no longer become unstable and can no longer duplicate. In other words, they are sterile, reproductive dead ends. Assume you have a population of 4 Grimishkas, and they have equal chance to either duplicate or turn into a panther. In this case, you'd expect the Grimishka population to remain roughly stable, while the population of panthers continuously grows. From my experience, this is true in principle, although it seems the duplication is a bit more likely than the panther polymorph. But the exact science of Grimishka population mechanics is still a thing of the future. Herding Grimishkas isn't a trivial thing, although it is very repetitive and tedious. 2 of their magical effects are quite dangerous. 1, they create eye surfaces, and if I slip, I get knocked out of invisibility, so I die. And they can explode in a small AoE, which also knocks me out of invis, so I die. Triggering the magic allergy depends on the proximity of the caster, not the proximity of the spell's impact. So I need to get somewhat close, cast minor illusion, and then get to a safe distance for when the instability triggers. Before too long, my Grimishka force had outgrown the confines of their cloning pen and initiated combat with the Crèche's quartermaster and her guards. It wasn't exactly a fair fight. Too many cats for too few toads, that's simple. My personal impact on the fights is very little from this point onwards. Pretty much just make sure more and more cats join the fight by awkwardly herding them forward with minor illusion, and then occasionally recast minor illusion to keep the normal Grimishkas unstable. Other than that, I just make sure to remain out of harm's way and watch. After beating the quartermaster, I was no longer content with winning small skirmishes. It was time to get to the heart of the corruption, to the one who must have taught these insolent children that were mean to me. It was time for my army to march to the classroom to face Instructor Keth. Oops. The game broke. The combat was completely frozen and I couldn't cast any spells anymore. Looks like all the minor illusion spam was a bit too much. Guess I have to be a bit more careful. The instructor died off screen while I was busy herding in the backlines. To be honest, most of the time in these fights I have no clue what's happening. I don't know whose turn it is, and the panthers are invisible half of the time and hop around randomly. Obviously, I wouldn't stop here. By now, my thirst for revenge had turned into a grotesque bloodlust. A need to throw my army into more and more violent fights. Grimishkas were all I could think about now. My past, Grimishka. My present, Grimishka. My future, Grimishka. My self-image, Grimishka. The fight against Captain Therazin was even more confusing than against the instructor. Because of the narrow corridor, I could hardly even see the other side of the engagement. Like a general to whom the battle is just distant thunder of cannons, I was almost lost in the fog of war. The Githyanki veterans slaughtered my Grimishkas in droves, but ultimately they didn't stand a chance. This was in part due to their strategy. Githyanki used shock tactics, get deep into enemy lines to hit weak points and cause disruption. But against an army of Grimishkas, all this does is to ensure even more of them enter the fight. It would have been wiser to hold a choke point, but this way they were quickly surrounded and neutralized. My victory was bloody but decisive. My own losses didn't matter. My army would simply regrow. But compared to the enemy that I was about to face, everything until now had been child's play. You might be seeing this and thinking that I'm overdoing it, but this is maybe a bit overkill. I disagree, and you'll soon see why. But even if I wanted my army to be more modest, it wouldn't be possible. The mechanism that moves it is the same that grows it, so it kinda has to be this large to even be here. Alright, this is it. We pulled the Inquisitor. Time to see what these cats are made of. Time to show him what... Oh, the game crashed. Okay, second try. This time I managed to get a soft pull, and the game remained stable. Most of the battle was so far away that it didn't even render. I didn't dare get any closer, especially not after this happened. The battlefield was soon filled with these nasty purple swords. The Inquisitor spawns them whenever he or one of his allies is attacked. They deal lots of damage and take forever to kill. That's why normally you want to focus him down ASAP, but of course my cats are far too stupid for that. Then the big boss himself entered the fight and immediately cast Mindsteel Link on everyone. This fun ability gives him +1 AC and +1 d4 psychic damage for every single affected entity. With him now at 59 AC and critting for almost 300 damage, I started to think the fight was unwinnable. Once the Inquisitor's ads were dead, the battle devolved into the most brain-dead grindfest I had ever seen. Most of the time, my cats didn't even try to hit the Inquisitor, but he also couldn't kill more than a few every single turn, and the number of floaty swords soon decreased to only a handful. Still, my Grimishkas died faster than they could replicate, so my army was slowly shrinking. At this point, most of my damage came from Armor of Agathis. the Inquisitor slowly unaliving himself every time he struck a buffed Grimishka. I won't lie to you, this fight was unbelievably boring. All I did was keep my Grimishkas unstable. There was no more gameplay. I began to hate my army, hate what I'd done, hate what I'd become. Finally, after about 2 hours, one absolute unit of a Panther had had enough and critted Inquisitor Wawargas out of existence.